Hi lovely humans, I am back on this channel and I am back with a highly requested video, a guide to Paris arrondissement, a guide to Paris neighborhoods to help you figure out where you want to stay or live in Paris. For a little bit of background, if you're new here, hi, I'm Clara. I am French born and bred. I've been living in Paris suburbs all of my life, and I've been living in Paris itself on and off for the past 5 years. I've lived in 4 different arrondissements, plus obviously done a ton of exploring, and I've also had friends living in various neighborhoods. So this is what I'm going to be basing this video on. This is going to be a lot of my personal opinions. I also did a bit of research to prepare for this video, but I would like to remind everyone that this is mostly going to be quite subjective and you are completely free to disagree, and if you do, please leave a comment. I would be very curious to hear what you think. With this disclaimer out of the way, let's get into it. So, if you're looking to move to Paris or maybe even just to visit, where you stay in Paris, which arrondissement you stay in, which neighborhood is important. It needs to be something that fits your lifestyle, your need, your price range as well. So there are 20 arrondissements, 20 districts in Paris. The more central you get, the more historic, but also the more expensive usually. And all around Paris you have a highway which is peripheric, and usually living along this peripheric means buildings are more modern, probably cheaper, but the quality of life might be not as good in like very general terms. And now I'm going to talk about each one of the arrondissements, and I'm going to put timestamp on the screen probably and in the description, so you can just jump to wherever you want if you already have an arrondissement in mind. The first arrondissement is at the center of Paris on the right bank of the Seine. It is one of the most expensive places in Paris because you have all of these public transportation lines. It's very old and historic, and you have these major landmarks such as Le Louvre, Jardin des Tuileries, Place Vendôme. It does mean that on top of being expensive, this whole arrondissement is very touristy, so that does mean quite busy and crowded all day long, all year round. If you are closer to Les Halles, which is a giant shopping mall, things are a bit less clean, it's a bit more messy, but also a bit more lively, and you have more affordable options for grocery shopping and such. Outside of that, it can feel a bit like a museum, so you don't have as many options. Safety is not an issue in general, except for the typical pickpocketing that you can expect where there are crowds and where there are tourists, and also some potential street harassment or catcalling around Les Halles. The second arrondissement is the smallest one of Paris, and it's just north of the first. Anything south of Rue de Réaumur is basically just an extension of the first arrondissement, so you can expect the same very old, gorgeous vibe to it, but also very fancy and touristy. The northeast of the arrondissement, close to Strasbourg-Saint-Denis metro station, has a bit more of a neighborhood atmosphere, of a lived-in atmosphere. It's more multicultural, a bit more affordable, though still expensive, and you have more local people living there. The northwest has bigger avenues and a little less soul, but still quite touristic. The third arrondissement is more renowned and even more touristy. It has both the Jewish neighborhood and also part of the gay neighborhood, which is called Le Marais. So as such, it is obviously a very lively place. You have lots of bars, lots of restaurants, lots of places to go out. It's a place that foreigners and French people alike love. Super fun, still very old architecture. So it combines a lot of these very desirable characteristics, which does mean that it is crazy expensive as well. The fourth arrondissement continues this trend of very old, very fancy, touristic, gorgeous places. Big landmarks include, just the City Hall, Notre-Dame de Paris, Ile de la Cité, just those little places. As such, it can feel a bit like the first arrondissement, just like a giant museum in open air. Buildings and streets are gorgeous, but finding anywhere to stay costs just a lot of money. North of the fourth arrondissement is the end of the Marais, Le Marais, the gay neighborhood. The whole east of the arrondissement, closer to Place de la Bastille and Canal Saint-Martin, is a bit more modern and a bit more young and has a very vibrant vibe to it. The 5th arrondissement brings us on the other side of the Seine on the left bank. It is again a very old and gorgeous arrondissement with more universities though than any so far. It has a history of being a student neighborhood, and as such, even though rent is still quite expensive, you can find more affordable grocery options, bars, etc. It has a very good cultural life, and while the north of the arrondissement along the Seine is more touristic, the south is a bit more quiet and less crowded while still feeling quite fancy and old. Same as so far, safety is pretty good except for some pickpockets. The 6th arrondissement has a very rich cultural history and as such is also extremely touristic. You might feel like I'm repeating myself, but I must insist, because living in the center of Paris means living in the most touristic part of the most touristic city in the entire world. So you do need to keep that in mind. But yeah, the 6th arrondissement has so many great things, such as Jardin du Luxembourg, so much greenery, so beautiful. Saint-Germain-des-Prés has this old history of culture and intellectuals. You have all of that tourist activity and food life and restaurants around Saint-Michel. You have all of the cinemas and bars around Odéon. So yeah, it is a small but dense arrondissement. It almost never sleeps, always agitated by both locals and tourists, and it does feel kind of quintessentially Parisian. The southwest or Notre-Dame-des-Champs metro station is a bit more modern and more calm. In general, the whole arrondissement is very well connected to public transportation lines and is entirely expensive. The 7th arrondissement is the biggest arrondissement I've talked about so far, and it is quite old again. It includes landmarks such as, the Eiffel Tower, the Invalides, and many museums and government institutions. It's a big arrondissement for government stuff. As such, it is super safe. It does feel like very calm, very quiet. It has more of a residential feel. Basically, you have less restaurants and cafes and bars, though you still have some, but you do have lots of apartment buildings, very old buildings like Haussmann classic architecture style. But yeah, you have lots of, I feel, rich families living there. The avenues are larger. It's not as much quaint, cute, small streets. So yeah, it's expensive, but I also lived there for 2 years and I did find a good place. The 8th arrondissement is again quite a big district. Now that we're slowly getting away from the center, everything is getting bigger. It is still an old and fancy district though, because it has the Avenue des Champs-Élysées, Jardin des Champs-Élysées, the Arc de Triomphe, Parc Monceau, some of those very well-known landmarks from the Paris right bank. Because of this, you have lots of luxury brands, hotels, embassies that are in the south of the arrondissement. The northern half, especially around Parc Monceau, is still quite upscale, but a tiny bit more affordable. This 8th arrondissement has the second lowest density of population in all of Paris, and I think it's probably because there are so many businesses and not that many people living there. In general, again, don't expect small streets. It is definitely an arrondissement of big, solemn avenues. The 9th arrondissement starts the trend in this list of actually more affordable arrondissement. It is a weird shape and mix of cultural influences, with some parts that are very fancy and the others not so much. The very south, close to Galerie Lafayette, is still quite cold and classic and definitely more upscale. But then just north of that, Gare de Saint-Lazare and its surroundings kind of suck as a place to live in. The half north of the arrondissement carries a taste of what I would call the old Paris. You have all of these museums, little gardens, places full of a very rich literary history, and you also have places that are more mixed and more popular, kind of all over the place. At the northern border lies Pigalle, and basically all along that boulevard you can find lots of bars, nightclubs, but also strip club, sex shop, prostitution. Yeah, so that area is more affordable. The rents drop a bit, but yeah, you do have to consider the fact that the cleanliness and the safety, especially if you're a woman, is a bit more iffy. The 10th arrondissement is a mixed bag in terms of neighborhoods. The eastern half of the arrondissement, which are the surroundings of Canal Saint-Martin, are pretty hipster and kind of trendy, still affordable and very attractive, usually to people in their 20s and 30s. The western half encompasses metro station Château d'Eau, Gare du Nord, Gare de l'Est, and to be honest, those are not places I would recommend you to live in. There is a lot of drug trafficking going on, some aggressive junkies. There is also prostitution, though I really don't feel like it is as much of a problem as drug traffic. So yeah, these places don't feel super clean or safe, and because they're around train stations, they aren't even that cheap. North of Gare du Nord, you have the Indian neighborhood, and which is, in my opinion, the best, most interesting neighborhood in that area. The 11th arrondissement is probably a lot less controversial. I think it has some very, very attractive features. You have so many little restaurants, bar, concert halls. The cultural life is pretty rich and the streets are super lively, especially in the southwest around Place de la Bastille and in the northeast around République and Belleville. The architecture is a mix of some older stuff with like older building, paved street, and also more modern buildings. And I think you can find housing for various budgets. Public transportation is pretty good, especially with Bastille and more République being a hub for metro lines and bus lines. On that topic, I do need to mention, on the topic of Place de la République, that Place de la République is very popular for ending or starting demonstrations. It's quite common to have demonstrations ending at Place de la République. So that's not even every week, but if you're very sensitive to that and you don't want to be near any type of demonstrations, living on Place de la République or just around it might not be the best option for you. The 12th arrondissement is quite large, especially since it encompasses not only this east part of Paris all along the Seine banks, but also technically it includes Bois de Vincennes. Bois de Vincennes is outside of Paris city limits, but does count as part of the 12th arrondissement. And yeah, I won't discuss it too much, except to remind you that you also don't have to live within Paris itself. There are a lot of things in what we call petite banlieue, or Petite Couronne, which is basically the suburbs that are very close from Paris. You can find lots of places that are great there. Not going to discuss them here though. Hit me up if you want more info. But anyway, so in the 12th arrondissement, you have the train station Gare de Lyon, which surroundings are pretty okay actually for a train station especially. You also have Bercy, which is very modern with a huge concert hall, arena, and not too much of a neighborhood life. The center of the arrondissement is very close to Coulée Verte, which is just like a small promenade, just a little stream of greenery in between the buildings that you can walk on, and it's very lovely. North of the arrondissement around Picpus and Nation has more of these large avenues and also very tall buildings, both old and modern. In general, the 12th arrondissement is also quite densely populated and has housing a bit all over the price ranges. The 13th arrondissement has quite a big reputation in Paris for being the Asian district, but it is much more than that. Indeed, it is the third largest arrondissement in Paris. Most of it is quite modern by Paris standard at least. You have lots of tall apartment building towers type of thing. In the east, along the Seine, you can find very new office buildings and the biggest library of Paris. And the southern half is basically the Asian district, especially East Asian, with a big East Asian communities and restaurants and shops, all of that. The feeling of safety varies a lot street by street and depending on time of the day, but actual crime rate is quite low. The west and north of the arrondissement are a lot more historic. They have more of a polished vibe, and so of course they're also a bit more expensive. The rest of the 13 is actually pretty affordable. The 14th arrondissement is the arrondissement I currently live in, and it has a nice mix of big boulevard and small residential or commercial streets. Even the big boulevard actually aren't that busy, aren't that loud, and the little streets are somewhat lively. You have some bars, you have some restaurants, you have some shops, but I feel like it's never too noisy or too loud. It is in general more of a quiet arrondissement, I'd say, though you do have some students living there. Landmarks include Cimetière Montparnasse, which is very peaceful, the Catacombs of Paris, and Parc Montsouris. The 14th is very safe from all type of crime. It is also quite well connected to most transportation lines. I think in general, Parisians don't really think about the 14th arrondissement. Like, they don't think of it in a bad way or a good way. They just don't think about it, which, I mean, make of that what you will. The 15th arrondissement is the biggest arrondissement of Paris, which actually surprised me when I was doing research for this video. It is overall a quite rich residential arrondissement with a mix of older and more modern building, and it seems to be very family oriented with a lot of school, lots of churches, lots of activities for kids after school. The north of the arrondissement is closer to the 7th and the Eiffel Tower, so it has some small, cute, old, quaint streets and is also very expensive. The east is where you find Montparnasse, which is a train station and a shopping mall, a shopping center, and the streets around it are full of bars and restaurants and places to shop at and cinemas and theaters, and it's a very lively part of the arrondissement. I feel like the rest of it is, as I said, more quiet, more family oriented, and more expensive. It is a very safe arrondissement by basically all accounts. The 16th arrondissement is arguably the second largest in Paris and definitely the richest. I say arguably the second largest because it depends on whether you include Bois de Boulogne or not. Same as the 12th arrondissement and Bois de Vincennes, the 16th arrondissement also technically includes Bois de Boulogne, which is though outside of the city limits. But yeah, and Bois de Boulogne has very cute parts like Parc de Bagatelle, but it's also quite known for being a place of prostitution. But yeah, Bois de Boulogne not considering, if we just focus on the 16th, as I said, it is definitely the richest arrondissement of Paris. It has many classic Haussmann buildings, and it's a place where lots of old money lives. Like, that's where you have lots of old rich families. You have lots of prestigious museums like Palais de Tokyo, Museum of Modern Art, Fondation Louis Vuitton. In the north, you're also getting close to the Arc de Triomphe, and so you have all of those type of fancy high fashion stores. The rest of the arrondissement in general does have some stores and restaurants, etc., but it is quite quiet, especially after a certain time of day. It's definitely not the most lively, and yeah, it is just very sophisticated and posh and calm. The 17th arrondissement is a bit more diverse. In the south, around Arc de Triomphe, etc., it is kind of an extension of the 16th, and it has that same fancy, posh vibe to it, though a bit more lively. Then as you progress north, you have the neighborhood of Batignolles, which is more young and bustling, with lots of coffee shops and restaurants. You also quickly get more north to the Porte de Clichy neighborhood, which is basically between the metro station Place de Clichy and the Périphérique, the highway. This is where the 17th get a lot more popular, maybe a bit more messy. It can feel rough around the edges, but it's still actually decently safe. The 18th arrondissement has a bit of an interesting reputation. On one hand, it has the highest number of crime reported out of any arrondissement in Paris, but also it has the highest population. The north of the arrondissement, all along the Périphérique, tend to be more modern, definitely not the prettiest, not the cleanest, especially if you get towards Porte d'Auvilliers and Porte de la Chapelle. And while these are some of the most affordable places in Paris, I would kind of not recommend them to anyone. On the other hand, the southwest of the arrondissement has the hill of Montmartre and the Basilique Sacré-Cœur, so it has so many old, quaint streets, so much charm, while still staying kind of popular, not the most affordable, but not the most expensive either, and it has just a great, lively, lived-in, dynamic feel, to me at least. The southeast of the arrondissement around Château Rouge, Goutte d'Or, is pretty mixed, and the atmosphere varies a lot street by street. The 19th arrondissement is another large and diverse one. Overall, I'd say it's quite young and affordable and has some neighborhoods with a lot of charm. The southern half, all around the gorgeous park of Butte-Chaumont, has a bit of more of a fancy feel. It has that classic Haussmann architecture, but it still has a few things for everyone. I've lived right on the south limit of the 19th, like kind of between the 19th and the 20th arrondissement, and I found it pretty ideal to live in as a young adult. The very north of the arrondissement is not super safe and can be less pretty. And in the middle, you have the huge Parc de la Villette and Canal Saint-Martin, which are both kind of great place to hang out at. It's green, it's chill, you have more trendy type of places and also interesting museums. And now the last one, the 20th arrondissement. The 20th is, I think, another one with quite a bad reputation with Parisians, but having looked at statistics and also having lived there, I think it is way safer than people think. It just really depends on where in the 20th you live. In the northwest, you have the neighborhoods of Belleville and Ménilmontant, both super multicultural with a very rich cultural life and also like neighborhood life. Having lived there, it really felt like a village in Paris. It has that type of feel, and you have just restaurants and shops from all around the world, and it is quite affordable. In the south of the arrondissement, you have the big avenues around Nation, and you also have Cimetière du Père-Lachaise, the most beautiful cemetery in Paris, really very much a haven of greenery and peace. Then the rest of the arrondissement, which means Télégraphe in the northeast, and basically just the whole east half along the peripheric, is not as clean, not as pretty, again, but also not super unsafe either. So here was a recap of the 20 arrondissements of Paris, neighborhood by neighborhood, to give you an idea of what to expect. Again, these were my opinions, my informed opinions, but my opinions nonetheless, and disagreement is welcome. And of course, also, I think that street by street and person to person, your experience of an area may vary a lot. I think there are things to like and to dislike in every area of Paris. It all depends on what your priorities are and what your criteria are. Again, if you want to learn more about the apartment hunting process in Paris, the link to that video will be somewhere on the screen and in the description as well. If you have comments, please leave a comment, or you can also DM me on Instagram. You can also follow me there to see more of my photography from all around the world and my daily life in Paris. You can subscribe to this channel for more tips and tricks on life in Paris, travel in France and abroad, cultural shocks, all of that. And yeah, thank you for watching until the end, and see you soon.